千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Daodejing by Lao Zi. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now. To be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process of the Tao. This story is called Modesty. The character you see there is Qian, and you see a stylized version of it down below in the graphic. So this graphic is interesting. The stylized version of the character to the right, this big character here, is stylized. It's done with brush calligraphy. And oftentimes, when you write it out in that style, the details of the left radical is abbreviated as a line, as you see here. So Qian is translated as modesty. And let me tell you the story about that from ancient China. This particular story, I think as everyone knows, sometimes I tell stories that are based on constructions by the sages, and they construct a story in a particular way to make a particular point. Occasionally, we have stories that are based on actual events from history. So this is actually one of them. This is a historical event about actual historical figures. So here we go with this story. Once upon a time, in ancient China, King Su of the Song dynasty traveled to the north with a scholar as his companion. They stayed at a temple as part of their journey. One day, King Su and the scholar took a walk around the temple, and they came across a monument. It was a very large stone tablet outside, and there was a poem inscribed into the stone surface. A poem inscribed in this large tablet, it was dating back to the Tang dynasty, which was several hundred years before their time. The poem was long. It contained about 3,000 characters. So both King Su and the companion, the scholar, looked at it together for quite some time. They read the words and they marveled at this poem because it was poetically beautiful. In the extreme, it was created by a truly talented poet from the Tang dynasty. So as they were looking at this, the scholar was a prideful man who was extremely proud of having an exceptional memory. He decided to put that memory to good use. He decided to memorize this beautiful but very long poem right there on the spot. He read it out loud and recited it several times as he walked. King Su walked with him, said nothing, and did not seem to pay any particular attention. When they returned to the temple, the scholar wrote down the poem from memory as a way to show off the power of his mind. There were some characters he did not remember clearly, so he left those places blank. When he was done, he calculated them, summed them up. He found that out of about 3,000 characters, he only could not remember about 14 of them. So there were 14 blank spaces in what he wrote. So he felt this was a great demonstration of his ability. 3,000 characters. Who would not be impressed by such a feat? How many people out there could remember even a small fraction of that? So again, he was quite proud. But before he could brag about it, King Su took the writing brush, filled out all 14 missing characters one after another, and then corrected several characters that the scholar memorized wrong. Then he set down the writing brush and resumed a casual conversation he was having with the others in the temple. He acted normally. There was no hint of any arrogance in his expression or demeanor. He did not look at the scholar, with, hey, you may think you are great, but look what I could do. No, there wasn't any of that. So the scholar was shocked. He had no idea the king has such an incredible memory, so much better than his own. He was stunned that King Su was not the least bit conceited, and he did not make a big deal out of it. This incident had a profound effect on the scholar. From that point on, whenever he caught himself about to be arrogant, he would remind himself, he would recall to mind King Su's virtue of humility. This would bring him down to earth, back to the moderation of being humble. The end. So let's talk about this story for just a bit. And before we leave this particular slide, I also want to point out that you are looking at a hexagram in the graphic. Right here in red and blue, I want to talk about what that means. But first, let's discuss the story for just a bit. As you know, I like to have a section called the Tao following every story. What can we learn from this particular story? Well, first of all, in life, it is similar to the story because it is often the people with a little ability that become arrogant. So in the story, the scholar had a good memory, no question about it. To be able to memorize nearly 3,000 characters, that is amazing by any standard. Now, his memory was not perfect. It was not as good as he wanted it to be, and that's why he missed 14 characters. But you see, it is always those whose abilities are not yet perfected. Those are the ones with the possibility of being quite arrogant. What about those who have real mastery? Well, real masters tend to be humble and keep a low profile. This is true pretty much in any discipline, in any field of human endeavor. Those who are masterful tend to be low-key and tend to not have a need to talk about it. The reason is because they don't really have anything more to prove to anybody. So in general, as you advance in a discipline, whatever that discipline may be, your perception expands. The more you advance, the more you can see in front of you. It's best to understand this from the opposite direction, and that is, when you don't know a whole lot about a discipline, you can't really see that much. You don't know what else is out there for you to learn. You just know what's in front of you. So the spectrum that we looked at before, the scale, I'll call it the ego spectrum. If you recall, from the left, that is the extreme end of self-delusion about being great. In the ego spectrum, as you get more into a subject, a field of study, a discipline, you begin moving, transitioning from the left to the right. Then mastery eventually leads to moderation. Here's how it looks. Here's how the scale appears with overinflation of ego, extreme delusion of the ego on the far left, with extreme self-humiliation, self-degradation, debasement on the extreme right. So that's the scale. As we talked about, being humble is the point of moderation between the two. It's the equilibrium. Neither inflated nor humiliating the self. When you begin to learn something, you may be quite arrogant. If so, you're closer to the left extreme. As you learn more, you begin moving toward equilibrium. So when you have total mastery, you are somewhere in the middle. You are humble, got nothing more to prove to yourself, to anyone else. No need to really talk about it. No need to really show off because you know yourself. So that is the moderation. That is the virtue of being humble, or as you see in the title of this particular slide, that's being modest. Being modest is certainly not being ego-driven. It is also not humiliating oneself. So it all makes sense. Now, I mentioned that there was that hexagram we were all looking at just a moment ago. Those hexagram, that particular hexagram and other hexagrams like it come from I Ching. So here, I want to delve a little deeper into that. I Ching, what am I talking about? Well, people say, mispronounce I Ching or I Ching. It's actually I Ching. Why do people mispronounce? Well, it's a result of the previous form of romanization system, the older style, the Wade Giles romanization system. In that system, E is supposed to be written as I. Of course, everybody looks at it and thinks that it should be I. And then Ching, without an apostrophe, is actually J sound. So that's supposed to sound like Jing. So it is supposed to sound like I Jing, but nobody knew that outside of academia. Later on, a newer system, the pinyin romanization system, makes it clearer. In this particular case, the romanization system, pinyin is easier to pronounce and be accurate to the original. So I Jing, as you can see there, the one to the left, that's the easier one. It's got 64 hexagrams. So let me bring your attention to the graphic that I have to the right-hand side. You see the yin and yang symbol there. The yin and yang symbol is surrounded by 8 trigrams. And I say trigram because it's basically 3 sticks, either whole or broken. Toward the bottom, you've got 64. You've got 8 rows and 8 columns, and these are hexagrams because they each have 6 lines. Below that, you've got 4, and then below that, you've got 2. So at the very bottom, you just have basically 2 to the power of 1. And so you've got a continuous line and a broken line. Then you've got 4, which is 2 by 2. So 2 to the second power, you've got those 4 permutations. You multiply that by 2 again, you get the 8, which is at the very top of the graphic. Now, from the 8, there's also 16 and 32. Those are skipped, and we go to the 64. So now let me talk about Qian, modesty. That's one of the hexagrams from this graphic here. Specifically, it's the 15th. So the 64 that you see here, you can actually number them. They're numbered from left to right and then from the top down. So the one that's got all continuous lines, unbroken lines on the upper left-hand corner, that's number 1. And then the one that's at the lower right-hand corner, that's number 64. So in the top row, you will count from left to right, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So because of that, you can now see that there's a numerical scheme associated with it, and Qian is the 15th hexagram. And if you were to actually count them, you would see that as part of the 64 there. And let me also talk about Qian, this particular hexagram, and the romanization thereof. To the left, you've got the pinyin romanization system. Again, this can be confusing, whereas the previous method of romanization could be confusing sometimes. That problem is solved by pinyin while introducing other problems. That's very similar to pretty much all human endeavor. So the Q there is supposed to sound like CH. Of course, nobody knows that outside of academia. So in the Qian, in the case of this particular hexagram, it is actually the older romanization system that is easier to pronounce. So the meaning, and this is the way that this particular hexagram is usually translated, it's either modesty or humility or authenticity. The real meaning is like a mixture of all these different translations. To be qian shu, as one example, that means being modest, being humble, and being authentic. So authentic, usually that's a deeper level of meaning. As you saw in the previous slides, when you possess the Tao of humility, it's actually being authentic. You are authentically true to yourself. Knowing what you're capable of, knowing where you have to improve, that's being very authentic. So every hexagram in the I Ching has descriptions associated with it. It's usually just a few brief paragraphs, but they are important. The descriptions are very important because they give meaning to these particular hexagrams. They depict life patterns in life. People have often asked, why is it that when I do a fortune-telling casting of I Ching, I get something that's so eerie in being so accurate? Well, the best explanation that I can offer is that I Ching was written to describe life patterns, and therefore there's something about that that gives it the power to be accurate in forecasting your life. So in the description of this particular hexagram, we see the following. There's a lot more text, but I'm isolating these 4 lines. They are poetically constructed, so you can see that there is a whole bunch of repeating characters among them. So these 4 lines, note that they all end on the same character, qian. 4 lines, 4 endings, all the same. So it's making a commentary on the virtue of modesty or humility. Then, if you've been following these talks for some time, you may be able to recognize other characters too. An easy one is the second character, in line 1, 2, and 4. So all three, the second characters, well, that's the character for the Tao. And you see it in the upper right-hand corner of our slide. So this is talking about the Tao in some way. And I'm going to explain exactly what these lines address. Then we have other characters that repeat themselves. You'll see the third from last character there is repeated in all 4 lines. That's a connective. It can be translated, it can usually be translated as and or, and it depends on the context. So other characters that are important, the character right next to it, like right in the middle, the 4th character in each line. Every line has 7 characters, and the character right in the middle, that is the character for full or overflowing. There's a specific context to that. Just as the last character there, humble, that's the virtue of humility. This character in the middle, full, to be full literally means being full of yourself. Similar to our English expression, if you're full of yourself, you're arrogant. So it's a commentary on arrogance versus humility. Let's dig a little deeper to see exactly what it says. Qian, it's a powerful hexagram. And you can see the 6 lines, how it's actually drawn. So I'm making this bigger so it's easier to see. Now let's talk about those 4 lines. First line among the 4 says, the Tao of heaven reduces the arrogant and benefits the humble. So those characters actually have a deeper level of meaning. The very first character there, that means sky or heaven. And what does it mean, reduces the arrogant and benefits the humble? Well, the ancient sages have noted that the heavenly Tao, the Tao of heaven, synonymous with nature, is something that's a balancing mechanism. If something is too much, it'll take away. If something is insufficient, it will add to balance everything out. There's a heavenly balancing mechanism that governs all and is part of the Tao. Easiest way to see what the ancient sages were thinking is that if you've got something that is too hot, that is heated to a very high temperature, that'll burn your hands if you were to touch it. You take that thing that is too hot, whatever that is, maybe a pot, maybe a container, and you leave it out in the open for a while. What's going to happen, as you know, is that the temperature starts to drop. It starts to cool off. And that's because it had too much heat. So the Tao of heaven is reducing the heat to bring it down to more of a balance. Same thing with something that's frozen solid. You set that out, it begins to defrost, it begins to thaw out. What's going on there? Well, it's got too little heat, and therefore nature gives it a little bit more heat to bring it into balance. Same with arrogance and humility. The Tao of heaven operates the same way on those 2 concepts. If someone is too full of himself, well, the heavenly Tao will reduce that, will cause that problem to manifest, therefore cause that person to fail, to take him down a notch or 2. Same with humility. In this case, heavenly Tao operates in a way that when someone is humble, that person receives benefits. How does that work? Well, if I am humble in trying to learn something, I gain knowledge. I benefit from the knowledge. So it makes perfect sense. Now, let's take a look at the second line. The second line is about the Tao of earth as opposed to Tao of heaven. And it says the Tao of earth transforms the arrogant and flows to the humble. What is that? Well, similar to the heavenly Tao, elsewhere in the Daodejing, Lao Zi specifically points out that the Tao of the world or the Tao of earth follows the Tao of heaven or the heavenly Tao. It's a mirror or a reflection of the heavenly Tao. So it too is part of nature. And in the world, those who are arrogant eventually become transformed because they're being reduced by the heavenly Tao. They're being taken away. That overflowing arrogance is getting taken out a bit at a time in the manifestations, in the karmic consequences that this person suffers, and therefore must change. So to transform is to change to become a person who's less arrogant. And the Tao of earth flows to the humble. It is very common in the Daodejing to talk about water as the perfect symbolism for humility. Water flows to the lowest point, the places that people dislike. So the Tao of earth is such that water is always flowing to the lowest point. This is exactly in keeping with what we're talking about in line 1. And that is the oceans and the rivers, they are the kings of 100 valleys. So that too makes perfect sense. Then we have another line. Notice that we don't have the Tao in this particular line. We still have the same iteration on arrogance and humility, but instead of heavenly Tao, the Tao of the earth, we don't have Tao in this particular line. What it says is demons and deities harm the arrogant and bless the humble. What is that? Well, the sages have noted long time ago that in all mythology, all the legends, in all the stories, it is invariable that the demons are harming the arrogant to bring them down to size, deities the same, and blessing the humble to give them benefits. And this is because demons and deities, those two are manifestations of the Tao. So they're actually following the same principles. And it's not just demons and deities, it's human beings too. In the last line, the Tao is back in the picture again. It's manifesting here in the second character. What's it talking about? The Tao of people dislikes the arrogant and prefers the humble. Yeah, well, these are now clear as reflections of one another. These 4 lines in I Ching is depicting, in my opinion, a very powerful statement about the world. Naturally, the Tao of people is that nobody likes a show off. We know that. We've seen that. We feel it. Nobody likes the arrogant. Everyone prefers the humble, the gracious, the polite, those who are not full of themselves, those who are humble enough to know they still have a lot to learn. So one last note, and this is why I say that this is the most powerful hexagram. That's not just my opinion. It's what I Ching experts say. And also, following these lines in the I Ching, it basically then goes on to talk about how humility or modesty, if you put it in a place of honor, it will shine. Even if you put it in a place that is lowly, it cannot be surpassed. No matter where you put it, it's good. Then it goes on to say, honorable men can depend on it to the end. Translation, honorable people can always depend on the virtue of humility, the virtue of modesty, no matter what. Use it all your life. So this is why I Ching experts say this hexagram is the best one of all, among all 64. Number 15 is the best among 64. And it's because all the other hexagrams contain elements of danger. Remember, these are life patterns we're talking about. No matter what other hexagrams you look at, it is always true that the greater your accomplishment, the greater the risk. Risk means danger. This concept here, Qian, this is the exception, because no matter what the situation in life, if you keep Qian in your heart, in your mind, everything becomes auspicious. Everything becomes smooth and easy. You will be welcomed no matter where you go. The Tao of people will see to that. Demons and deities provide you with blessings. The heavenly Tao benefits you, and so does the Tao of earth. Goodness flows to you. That is why I say this indeed is the most powerful hexagram in I Ching, and the virtue of modesty, humility, the Tao of humility, this is among the most powerful principles that we can study in the Tao. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us all travel safely so we can meet again. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.